Welcome to today's webinar. My name is Paul Adepoju, and I'm the Community Manager for the ICFJ Global Health Crisis Reporting Forum. And today we are starting the first in a two-part webinar that focuses on digital security training for journalists. And since the global pandemic began, we've had to do more things online and rely more on technological solutions. Very few individuals, very few journalists were aware of this Zoom platform that we are using prior to the pandemic, but it has become the platform where most of the meetings are being held. And the similar rule also applies to several other web-based platforms that have seen increased adoption since the global pandemic began. As the adoption of technology is increasing, so also is the risk that these tools are posed to individual users. And as journalists, security has also become more important, considering the fact that journalists' lives are usually at stake in some parts of the world. So today we will be starting our journey that is geared towards improving digital tools of journalists. And we have an expert with us today that is going to help us start this journey. She's Harlo Holmes. How are you doing today?
Hi, how are you?
I'm really excited that you are joining us today.
I'm so excited to join you too.
Especially considering the organization that you represent. Harlo is the Chief Information Security Officer and Director of Digital Security at the Freedom of the Press Foundation. So once I'm done with my introduction, we are going to go right into our presentation. But before she starts, before the presentation starts, I will encourage you that if you are joining us on the Zoom platform, and you have any question for our expert today, you can use the Q&A option on the Zoom platform. And if you are joining us on Facebook live stream and you have any burning question that you have for our experts, I also encourage you to use the comment box below the live stream. And those that are able to participate in both trainings, the one happening this week and the one that will be having the concluding session next week, we'll be appreciating you with token, which is a digital certificate that will be sent to you via email. So I do encourage you to fully participate in this training. And yeah, without wasting much of your time, Harlo, are you ready for us?
Yes, absolutely. And oh gosh, I love looking at the chat and seeing like, hello from France, hello from Morocco, hello for like wherever y'all are coming from. It's awesome. It's so great to be with you today. And thank you so much for inviting me. Okay, so this is being recorded. It's live on Facebook. It's all on the internet. And so I do want to just like put a little bit of like ground rules for the session in our heads. Let's say that it's not especially Chatham House rules, but like let's consider it kind of Chatham House rules in that for people, you know, like on the chat, everything that you learn here, you can absolutely share outward. If you learn something that you find particularly interesting, feel free to tell your colleagues, feel free to like, you know, tell your friends or even your family, because sometimes your family loves hearing this stuff. But if anybody does have like any specific questions about investigations that they're working on, or, you know, something similar to that, like do not put that in the chat. Do not, you know, like unmute yourself and offer that information just because like all of this is being, you know, entirely recorded. But other than that, that's pretty much it. And I am going to share my screen in order to look at our slide deck. Cameras are not required. I hate cameras. I really do. Hate having to look at myself. So I'm going to cover up my camera. And what I want you to do is I want you to look at the slides that I'm presenting. Okay. Doop, boop, 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 boop. All right, you should be able to see my screen. Is that correct, Paul? Stella, can you give me a heads up about that?
Yes, we can see your screen.
Awesome. All right, let's get started. Okay, so welcome to the first part of 2 sessions about digital security. And what we're going to be talking about today is advanced account security and also secure communications, which is especially important now that, the geopolitical, roadmap has kind of changed. And so these are things that should be kind of just in your head. The second session that we're going to have is going to dig a little bit deeper into a lot of these topics, but this is just kind of like fundamentals. Okay. So what we're going to do today is we're going to talk about basics of risk assessment. We're going to talk about password managers, including Lastpass. Lastpass is not like the entire a solution that we recommend. So if you want to use another password manager, let us know via email, via the chat, whatever, we can help you work through that. We're going to work with two-factor authentication and why that's important. We're going to talk about communications, so 4 and 5, encrypted communications, and when you have to make decisions about how to connect to people over encrypted communications, like how to just kind of figure that out, putting that kind of roadmap in your head. Okay, so number 1, let's talk about risk assessment. So ultimately, when we talk about risk assessments, there are a couple of questions that you ask yourselves, and the primary, the most important one to ask yourself is who is that adversary that concerns you? There is what we like to call a front door and a back door type of adversary. The front door adversary is, adversaries that operate out of rule of law jurisdictions. So, most of the countries that we reside in who will, via their intelligence agencies, their law enforcement agencies, depending on how it dices out, they will, offer a subpoena that they get from a judge to verify to Facebook or Twitter or something like that in order to get details about your DMs, about the IP addresses, and we'll get to that in a moment, about where you are on Earth, where you're contacting people. And when we talk about adversaries, we talk about what are the resources they have in order to do that. And that's usually a calculus of time, money, and technical skill in order to do so. So do they have the time to do so? Is this a type of question that they want to answer within a couple of months, within a couple of weeks, within a couple of days? Do they have the money to, hire, consultants who can do forensic research or whatever? Do they have in-house the technical skill in order to, pull an API query on Twitter, let's say, to see, what you're up to? And then we ask ourselves, how likely is that actually going to happen? A lot of people immediately think oh yeah, totally the NSA, GHCQ, whatever intelligence agency that you're worried about is entirely interested, Interpol, let's say, entirely interested in the work that I do. And maybe that's actually not the case. But that said, when you're working with, adversaries that, are on the ground, I'm definitely thinking of the Taliban right now. Those are adversaries that you do have to kind of think about in terms of the likelihood that they will actually do any of these things. Okay. But that said, I will say that for the vast majority of members of the press, the most likely adversary is actually a troll. It's not going to be a law enforcement. It's not going to be, a governmental agency. It's going to be a troll. And this can be pretty much like one dedicated person who is living in their mom's basement, who has absolutely no skills whatsoever, but can rely on, like harassing you online, filling up your DMs, trying to fish you, which means, and we'll get into that a little bit later, but which means, like pulling tricks in order to get you to trust them, in order to, like escalate to a point where they can get into like, more interesting accounts like your Twitter DMs or your Facebook DMs or your email or whatever. To get that username and password combination. And that's actually kind of like the biggest troll that you're going to encounter when you're working on a piece of news that is especially, contentious on the internet. If you do find yourself in a position where you are concerned about 3-letter agencies or 4-letter agencies, like intelligence, what we're saying, your threat model is a little bit different. They have a lot of time, they have a lot of money, they have a lot of expertise in-house in order to, get what they need. And like, I really can't, at this point, give you like 100% tried and true, information about how to evade 3-letter agencies, how to evade intelligence, because it's very, very hard. But that said, you do have like a couple of tools in your playbook, and we're just going to talk about what that looks like when working with, these are called front door adversaries who do have to play by the rules, have to talk to judges, talk to Facebook, use their legal expertise in order to get what they want in most cases. And so we can talk about tools that protect you in that regard. But that said, this is pretty hard. We also have in the middle, we have law enforcement, and depending on where you are in the world, that's actually going to differ, the tools that they have. They usually have plenty of time, a certain amount of money, so they're well funded. And their expertise is not as high as other adversaries that we talked about, but they still do have access to expertise. And this is usually where you see things like warrants, subpoenas, requests for data, etc., depending on what your country wants to call it, in order to ask platforms for information. And this also includes device confiscation. So if you were ever covering, let's say, a protest or any other such events, maybe even an election, depending, you might see law enforcement just literally pin you down, take a phone from you, and use that in order to fill up a dossier about a particular journalist. Some of you also are working on cases that have to do with, corporate corruption. And this is a very, very interesting adversary, the corporate figure, one dedicated group, but they have so many lawyers. They have a lot of money and so much money to pay lawyers with. And so they will pretty much do anything in order to, get at your various assets. And so That actually includes front door and back door tactics, of which it's actually really surprising. So one of the things that corporate figures do when people are, like sniffing around their misdeeds, they hire, like private investigators who like hang out outside of your house and take pictures. They hire hackers in order to try to get into your Facebook account via, pretending to be your friend. Like they do backdoor stuff that is actually really appalling, in addition to front door stuff, such as using their lawyers in order to like issue subpoenas and warrants, and etc. So for those of you who are working on anything having to do with corporate misfeasance, that's the highest adversary that you need to have in your head. There's also, and we're going to get to that in a little bit more detail about what this means, but then there's also just like hackers, usually not targeted towards you, usually motivated by, monetary gain, but they are folks who have access to the same network that you are on. And, they'll try to use whatever skill that they have in order to interrupt your connections to, like various sources on the internet, like snarf usernames and passwords in order to log in as you from other places. But yeah, so these are like the typical adversaries that we think about when we are performing risk assessments. Do you have any questions before I get into like some of the fundamentals? And feel free to unmute yourself if you'd like to, because this is a perfect time for you to do that.
So I think we already have a couple of questions for you. So if any participant would like to make a comment, just raise your hand and I can allow you to speak. But maybe if you quickly want to take some questions. So a question is the Havira's password saver safe? And so that's the question that you have now. So what can you say about that?
Okay, we are actually going to get into password managers. Short answer to that is that password managers are an excellent addition to your arsenal of tools that you can use. And we'll get into why in just a moment. But yes, certain password managers like 1Password, Lastpass, Bitwarden, there's a number of them, Keepassxc, those are really, really great. And so you should use them.
So I think you continue and we'll get the other questions at the end of today's presentation.
Awesome. Okay, great. All right, so as we already did have a question about password managers, let's talk about like just basic account security, which definitely like when you're thinking about that backdoor adversary who's going to try to hack into stuff, that is like the best way to protect yourself from that. And so ultimately, like a basic account security stuff covers so many of your bases that will prevent, that particular adversary. And they would have to try to do something extraordinary and you would probably notice. And that's what keeps you more secure. So, boop, boop, noink, noink, noink. Okay. So, for instance, just like, giving you like a little bit of a story as to why account security is so important. When you're thinking about the devices that you might have in your home, like a Ring camera, for instance, not provide or not having a reliable password manager and two-factor authentication safeguarding those accounts, like actually does invite, like low-level adversaries like hackers into your home. And there was a really funny story about how all of these hackers were totally like getting into people's houses via their Ring cameras and being able to spy on people's children just because they didn't have these things. And so this was actually here. Okay, you can see these threads. Hackers, what they do is they just like kind of look at all of there's a very easy lookup tool. They look up what are all of the Ring cameras that are connected to the internet. And then when they find those cameras, they pop into people's houses because they are not properly managed with passwords and two-factor authentication, and they can surveil and interact with people's children. So what we need to do is we need to think about having a password manager in order to make sure that you have a long, unique, emphasis on unique and complex passphrase that unlocks all of those passphrases that you have in your password manager. This is, so I'm talking about Lastpass. However, there are a couple of other options out there. And if you have other options that you want to use, let me know. But ultimately what the password manager does is that on your computers, desktop, on your mobile phones, on any other device that you might use, you can sync these passwords in order to like authenticate. And the benefit is twofold. One is that it makes sure that you have long, unique, and complex passphrases, some of which are generated entirely by those apps in order to get access into your accounts. Another is that it does provide two-factor authentication in that in addition to having a username and password, you are going to be challenged to, like add like a code that you receive via an app or via, like something else, and we'll get into other alternatives momentarily, in order to like gain access to the account. And these are stated the best ways to protect any account. So if you do find yourself up against a backdoor adversary that is just like trying to slide into, your personal space on a variety of platforms, this is like the ground floor of, like how best to protect yourself. Okay, and so to answer the question about if password managers are safe, yes, they are. And they're definitely better than any alternative, such as, keeping them in a Google Drive spreadsheet or doing whatever else. And also they do have functionality in all of the password managers that we recommend that allow you to share passphrases securely with other members of your team if you do require, for some reason, to share accounts with other people. So Lastpass, right? Here you go. And so ultimately, like the key takeaway is that your passphrase that you use to unlock that password manager should be, once again, long, unique, and complex. And so that usually means at least 12 characters, as you see here, at least one digit, one lowercase, one uppercase. It's always going to be, it's always a good idea. What I recommend is actually using a passphrase passphrase rather than a password, simply because the length of your password actually does matter in terms of what hackers can do in terms of like getting into accounts. There are very free, open source, easily accessible software programs. I'm running one right now, actually, in order to like, defeat very, very simple passwords. And so what you want to do is actually like resist, using something like password 123, and instead using a passphrase, which is really cool because it's it's something that you can keep in your head. You can make like a funny anecdote story about why groovy puzzle monorail crewman turkey actually can stick in your head, right? And it's easily typable. So if you're on your phone or if you're on your computer or if you're on any other device, you can just type that out. Also, if ever you find yourself in a situation where you have to talk to like customer service, talking to, let's say, your mobile phone provider, right? And they're like, oh, so what's your security key? You can actually say to the customer service person, groovy puzzle monorail crewman turkey, and not have to like worry about the complexity, because this is absolutely enough complexity for a computer and enough complexity to stymie any hacker. So for example, the password manager that I love is called Keepassxc. It is available for all of the platforms. Once again, mobile phones and also like laptops and stuff like that. And it will entirely generate, if you click that button, it will generate like as many words as you need in order to create those passphrases. And some of those have become my absolute favorite. So there you go. So password managers create these passphrases for you. You store that master passphrase in your head. You can, and it's perfectly okay for you to write it down until you like perfectly memorize it, and then destroy that piece of paper or put it in a safe or whatever you need to do, however you feel, as long as you just don't take a picture of yourself with that in the photo and post it to Instagram. But I'm sure you already are aware of those particular threats. Are there any questions about that before we move on?
I think you should, let's complete the presentation, then we'll take all the questions.
Okay. Alrighty. So just as a reminder, like some services that you use are going to require in addition to like a phrase or whatever, they're going to require things like, numbers, uppercase letters, etc. And so just be as creative with that as you possibly can, but don't worry about it. It still just works. Okay. And the cool things about password managers, once again, this is Lastpass. We recommend Lastpass, we recommend 1Password, we recommend Bitwarden, we recommend Keepassxc. There's so many options out there. But ultimately, it's very simple to organize those passphrases inside of your password manager to make sure that you have easy access to them. That said, even if we have the best passphrases and we have two-factor authentication and all that stuff, there's always going to be the prospect of hackers getting access to those things. And that's often scary. I do recommend you do one thing that you might find scary, but I'm challenging you to meet that fear. What I want you to do, you don't have to do it now, but whenever you have time, I do want you to register yourself with a site called Have I Been Pwned? Pwned spelled with P-W-N-E-D. And what this does is it allows you to get alerts via email when an email address that you've used in order to register for a site has been subject to a data breach. And it's scary because, like, yeah, you might get like an alert that says like, yeah, you have been pwned. However, I do want you to remember that when you get an alert from a site that has been subject to a data breach, it is not your fault. You have not done anything wrong. It is entirely the site that you have been using that is at fault. So in, 2013, Adobe fucked up. I didn't mess up. It was Adobe that messed up, and they had their, data about their various users subject to a breach. Stratfor in 2011, same thing. It was not my fault. But that said, the reason why we use password managers and two-factor authentication, why they're so important, is because if a hacker can find a leak of Adobe's usernames and passwords of all of their users, the hackers are probably not thinking, oh, really interested in people's Adobe Photoshop. They're not thinking that. They're thinking, what if actually the same username and password on Adobe would get me into somebody's bank account or Gmail account or Twitter account or anything of higher value? And so this is why if ever you do find yourself subject to a breach, or if ever you're just kind of thinking after this session about I do use the same password across multiple sites, you might want to take that opportunity to rotate your password and to put it in a password manager with something long, unique, and complex. So a lot of the password manager databases that we recommend have really excellent metrics in order to just kind of boost your knowledge about that. And so I'm not going to belabor this point too much, because as you start using these tools, it will become apparent to you. One thing that I will say for two-factor authentication, oh wait, actually this is boop, boop, boop. Sorry, we talked about shared. Okay, okay, yeah, I'm sorry, I'm skipping across. Okay, so one thing that I do want to recommend regarding two-factor authentication, which is entirely necessary, is that there is, this is the wrong link. So if you go to two-factor auth, or rather the new link is 2fa.directory, and actually let me put this in the chat, 2fa.directory. So you can actually have a look at all of the different services that you possibly use in order to enable two-factor authentication. And while most services, and you probably have dealt with this perhaps with your bank or whatever, offer the SMS-based service, there are actually better ways of doing two-factor authentication, and those better ways are the software token and the hardware token, which you see on the last two columns on the right. And so you definitely do want to privilege privilege using two-factor authentication with those particular methods rather than SMS or phone call or email, because they're just way, way more secure. Particularly because, like even if you do have two-factor authentication, it's entirely possible that someone could try to commandeer your phone number. And if someone commandeers your phone number, adds another line to your phone account, and this does happen a lot across the African continents, someone can actually receive those two-factor authentication codes and thus defeat the entire purpose of it. And we've actually seen that. So a couple of years ago, 5 years ago, DeRay McKesson, who's a very, very dear friend and a prominent Black Lives Matter activist in the United States, literally had that taken from him. Someone impersonated him, called his mobile provider and said, "I'm DeRay. I have a new phone. Please, associate my cell phone number with with this new phone that I got." And then the adversary then had access to DeRay's two-factor authentication and was at that point able to do things like, "I forgot my phone number, so help me get back into my account," use two-factor authentication, etc., and was able to get into his Twitter, his Gmail, and everything. And that actually had like a huge impact on the Black Lives Matter movement because everybody was in DeRay's email. So ultimately, like the research shows, and this is a bit of research that Google performed over the past 2 years about the how effective two-factor authentication is regarding, the various methods that we receive it. And so if you want to, have the most effective two-factor authentication based off of your threat model, and if that is a targeted attack, you want to have a security key, and we're going to get into that in a moment, to minimize, having an SMS code, even though sometimes that is entirely required, but you should avoid it wherever possible. You want to use, on-device prompt, which is that two-factor authentication app that I was talking about, of which, let's say Google Authenticator, which is a free app made by Google that you can download onto your app that doesn't have those vulnerabilities, and also just kind of has the benefit of being available whenever you need it. So if you are traveling, if you're roaming, if you're in that corner of the office where you don't receive reception, you're always going to have access to those codes. And it's incredibly easy to set up. So one thing that I will say about two-factor authentication is that you definitely want to make sure that your password manager also has the material that it needs. We call this the seed, the two-factor authentication seed, in order to set up two-factor authentication in the event that you change your phone or you whatever happens, in order to wipe or to prevent you from access to the device where you're using that particular service. The reason why is because two-factor authentication is incredibly useful. It's incredibly powerful for protecting accounts. And if you lose access to your second factor, then you risk being wiped out of your account for your entire life. I have had that experience before. Like I actually have a Tumblr account from like the early 2000s that I can never access again. And I even asked Tumblr, like, please help me get back into my account. And they were like, no, we can't do that. You have two-factor authentication on it. There's nothing that we can do. So really do protect your two-factor authentication seed. And whenever you're setting up two-factor authentication, actually right here, where you see that barcode, or you click that link that says can't scan it, for instance, that will show you, the material that you need in order to initiate two-factor authentication on whatever device that you use for that purpose. I know that this is a little bit of a complex idea, so I do invite you to unmute yourself if you have any questions about that.
A couple of questions, and so I think we can take some questions now.
I will move on. Okay.
Are you there?
So in addition to Google Authenticator, also Authy, which is a really cool other alternative, and that is connected to your phone number. So you have to do like less work if you are like setting up two-factor authentication with Authy. And then there is the hardware token. We talked about the software token. Now we're going to talk about the hardware token. This is an example of a hardware token where if you like have this like dongle that you can stick on your keychain or whatever, you stick it into your computer and you just tap the button and it does the two-factor authentication for you. That is actually, for me, my go-to, and it is the most secure of all of those alternatives. If you want a YubiKey, let Paul know, and Paul will let me know, and I can have them delivered to you, because we actually do have a great relationship with the company that makes these that you see here, and also a relationship with Google that makes an alternative. So, like if you want a Google one, or if you want a YubiKey one, which are manufactured out of Switzerland, we have so many to give out to members of the press. So let us know. All right, so to recap, account security, complex, long, unique, every single account that you have. And I want this to be your homework. Use your password manager and enable two-factor authentication. So your password managers are going to have extensions that are available in your browser that will like autofill. And a lot of people have this question like, oh, like I'm on a Mac, I use, like Safari keychain and blah, 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 blah. That's good too. That's great. It's great. That said, I recommend, instead of using like, Safari keychain, having a look at password managers that integrate with your browser, just because they have portability across devices. But that said, if you are a Mac user, not a Windows user, but if you're a Mac user and you are using like, Safari keychain, that's perfectly cool too. All right. So now let's talk about assets and what we have to protect. And in addition to, things like your passwords, which you talked about in exhaustive length, but you also have things like your browsing history, your social media history. Perhaps you have like stories that you are drafting yet to be filed. You probably have like a lot of stuff in like spreadsheets. All of these things are called assets in our threat model, and they are worth protecting as well. And so when everyone's resources are always going to be different, but that said, I do want to encourage people to think about those assets in terms of tiers. And those tiers that you designate depend on where those things should reside and where you should have access to those things where they reside. And that includes what we have is like, a couple of questions to get you starting to think about how to put together those tiers. What is important to you personally versus what is important to you from a work perspective? What is important to you individually versus what is important to you to work on as a team? What do you need to collaborate on? If you do travel, as the world is opening up, what is it necessary to bring with you when you are traveling? And also think about the possibility of loss. So if something were to happen to any particular device or asset or whatever, how much of a hit would you take if that were to be lost forever? So one way of thinking about these things has to do with just kind of thinking about things in circles, concentric circles that spread outward, where you have at the outermost level, you have things that are entirely casual and can be looked at by literally anyone, something that would not give you anxiety if someone were to interrogate it. And then things on an inner level that, contain the keys to your particular kingdom, such as passwords, financial information, secure communication with people that you might be collaborating with. And, if you're working on a particular story, sensitive footage and documentation that you don't necessarily think about publishing, but is used in order to advance your story. And we have, and I'm sure you know, as not only creators of, but consumers of the media, you understand that journalists tend to be targeted for their source material that doesn't necessarily make it into print. And so you definitely do want to think of that inner tier when you're working with source material, whether that is interview notes, whatever form that they might take. Okay, so I'm about to switch to another chapter. I am going to ask you to unmute yourself, or for Paul to pop into the Q&A in order to give me any questions that we might need to resolve before we go into a next part.
Yeah, thank you. I've been seeing quite a number of
actually, I see one question. Physical security USB keys should comply with the vendor independent FIDO UTF standard, but these are cheap for outright purchase. Okay, I will have a look at that. Cool.
Can you hear me?
UB keys for everybody. Are there any other questions? Oh yeah, Paul,
yeah, can you hear me? Hello, can you hear me? I don't think you are hearing me.
In the interim, I'll take another question. Is Lastpass reliable as a secure manager? Is there an alternative, or is it really the best one out there? And also, how often do you suggest we change the master password? Okay, so these are really, really good questions. Lastpass is a great alternative. Ooh, yeah, okay, so everybody can hear Paul except me. That's crazy.
Yeah, can you hear me now? Is it better now?
Sorry, Paul.
Hello?
Everyone can hear Paul. Except me. Oh, wow. Nuts. All right, we'll figure it out. Paul, please feel free to use the chat for some reason, because I can't hear you. So as for your LastPass question, so LastPass is incredibly secure. And there are also alternatives. The alternatives that we recommend for LastPass are 1Password, and here I'll type that in our chat. 1Password. There's also Bitwarden, and then there's also Keepassxc. Those are my absolute favorite password managers. And if you are using any of those, you should be in good hands. As for how often you should change your master password, that absolutely definitely depends on you. Obviously, if you are subject to a data breach, which we discussed a little bit earlier, feel free to rotate all of the passwords. But that said, you don't really have to change the master password frequently. The importance of that password, as long as it has not been subject to a data breach, is that it is long, unique, and complex. And the best way to store a long, unique, complex password in your head is to get accustomed to it. So feel free to keep that passphrase that unlocks your password manager for as long as is reliably possible. Okay, I'm going to continue on. All right, so now we're going to talk about just how the internet works. This is very important for you, especially when you're thinking about how to communicate with other members of your team and to sources that are contributing to your story. So what we have here is a diagram of, let's say, how the internet primarily worked in, like, let's say 2001, and also how the internet works in several parts of the world, like Japan, for instance. What this means is that this internet does not have what we like to call transfer encryption, meaning that we have on either end of our diagram, we have a phone and we have a computer. We like to call these clients or endpoints, depending on how you feel in security land. And they are having a conversation with one another via that cloud icon that you see in the middle, which we call a provider. And a provider could be something like Gmail, or it can be like Facebook, or it could be, like WhatsApp or Signal or whatever, like anything that you use, a platform that you use in order to communicate between two or more parties. And actually, this diagram is exactly what Facebook looked like when I joined Facebook in 2005. I got to join Facebook in 2005, and it was not encrypted. And that meant that in addition to Facebook seeing that I said hi and my friends replied OMG, smiley face, it also meant that anyone who has what we like to call visibility onto the network were able to see that as well. Not only were they able to see it, but they also could, if they wanted to, modify the content of the data that we were sending to one another. And so everybody with eyeballs that you see in this diagram, we call them adversaries. They're always adversaries, and that includes Facebook. Facebook is an adversary, but also people with visibility onto the network, such as, let's say, our Wi-Fi operator, which would be, like those dudes who are in the IT department at your office or university or in, like whatever place, or even yourself, actually. It also includes your internet service provider, which are the people that you pay money to in order to serve internet into your home or office or wherever it is that you are. It also includes hackers. So if we see at the bottom right, unlawful interception, that includes, like the kid at, the Starbucks who is sniffing people's like credit card numbers or whatever, the hackers. And lawful interception, which means that if a judge would grant law enforcement a warrant to sit outside of your house in a van and to intercept your internet traffic if they're close enough, like that is what that includes. So when we see HTTP : / whatever it is that we're visiting, that means that the connection is insecure and unencrypted and can be surveilled and modified by anyone who has access to our network. And that sucks. That includes everything that you do digitally. So that includes the content of what you say, meaning that hi and that OMG. That includes the metadata, and we're going to get into exactly what that means in a moment. And that also like applies to not only like, your communications on Facebook, but like perhaps on email, perhaps on SMS calls, perhaps on, like anything that you are doing. So that is not optimal. It's not good. And so thankfully, most of the internet in the Western world is encrypted. And once again, I do mention Japan as being like an outlier. Also China. Asia really does have a problem with encryption. But what we have done is most websites have applied transport layer encryption, meaning that you have HTTPS and you have a green lock icon in your browser of choice. And that means that people who do have visibility onto your network are not able to see the content of what you're communicating. It doesn't mean that, like Facebook or Google or whomever you're communicating with doesn't have access, because obviously they do. And quite frankly, that's why Facebook is as rich as they are. They have billions of dollars. They know what you're communicating. They know about the hi and the OMG response. But that said, people with visibility onto your network, locally do not have that access. All they can see is that, okay, you're communicating with Facebook, you're communicating with Google, but we don't know the content of what you are sending. And so this eliminates the content from the equation, but it does not eliminate the metadata from the equation, because they do know that you are visiting Facebook. They do know when you're visiting Facebook. They just don't know, who you're communicating with, what you're saying, things like that. And but that's best. And ultimately, that is, the primary, I guess, way that we should interface with the internet. So you definitely always want to make sure that when you are on platforms, they are protected with HTTPS, meaning transport layer encryption. And so, for instance, this is great when you're on, like email or Slack or Twitter or Facebook nowadays, but they definitely, have their limitations. Are there any questions about that before we move on? And also, I do invite anybody to unmute themselves or to respond in the chat about how that is optimally implemented when you are talking to sources.
Okay.
Because of course, you know, like if you are on a platform like Twitter, for instance, and communicating with a source, while you know, your ISP or a Wi-Fi operator or a hacker or whatever does not necessarily know that you're communicating with a specific person over Twitter, Twitter can still be, you know, subject to a subpoena or a warrant or, you know, a court order in order to produce that particular content because they have visibility. All right.
Can you hear me
So
now? I don't know
we're
whether Hilo
coming
can hear me. I
towards
don't
the
think she
end
can.
of our session for today. And yes, and thank you, Paul. Just another question. If you do have, you know, like a request for a YubiKey or a Google Advanced Protection Kit, please do let Paul know, and then we can distribute them to you. Also, the next week, we're going to continue a little bit more with like source communications that include things like end-to-end encryption and why platforms like Signal and WhatsApp are so groundbreaking in the work that we do. And yeah, let me know if you have any questions in the interim, because we have a week for me to like finesse my slide deck so I can make sure that we're covering all of the bases that are really important to you. All right.
Yes. Thank you very much,
So
Hilo. And
that's it.
I don't know if you can hear me, but this has been a really, really extensive and deep. Can you hear me now? I want you to be able to hear what I'm saying. I don't think Hilo is hearing me. That's quite interesting. Okay. And we have lots of questions already, and the comments are also coming in. So what we can do is we are going to, since this is a two-part presentation, we are going to really start with the questions, and next week, so that we can, and what I will do is that, what I'm going to do is maybe somebody, I don't know whether Hilo is hearing me now. Hilo, has it improved? No, I don't think so. I don't think Hilo is hearing me. Everybody can hear me except Hilo. Okay. So I want to try one more thing before. So while we wait and figure out if Halo can hear me, and but if Halo doesn't, I think Halo is trying something. I want to be sure that option works before. Hello.
Now I can hear. It was my headphones. Yeah, my headphones.
Oh, very good, very good. And so let me just take one or two questions. So the first question that I think somebody was interested in the simple understanding of what a paraphrase means. So what does a paraphrase mean?
A passphrase. So ultimately, like, I recommend words. I really, really do. The password managers that I've recommended here, they have the capability to generate like 5 random words, you know, or like depending on the device. Like, so for my computers, I, you know, like have like 4 or 5 words. On my phone, I have like 3 words or something like that in order to just like open it up. And I think that that's like way more protective than, you know, like password 1, 2, 3, or like anything that you like kind of have in your head.
Yeah, so there's a question on password manager.
Yes, Alper.
There's a question on password manager. And so the question is it paranoid to expect a password manager?
Yes. Yep. People are putting the XKCD in there. Totally.
Can be accessed by password manager. So they are really not foolproof.
Well, I mean, nothing is foolproof, ultimately, but I think like password managers though are, the best that we can do, as long as we are, think about redundancy. So there are ways to export your passwords into a file that you can like put on a USB stick or something like to keep safe, in order for I don't know, like a future where you don't have access to that password manager.
Okay.
So that's some like backup is something that you do have to think about. But other than that, I really do think that it's the best way forward. It's way better than, like keeping, passwords in your head and like coming up with
Okay.
like fun little tricks in order to like reuse the same password. Yeah, way better.
Yeah, there's also a question, talking of passphrase, there's a question on some platforms, some websites, when you want to use passwords, instead of passphrases, they would require that such a password must have capital letter and numbers. So in that case, how do you still make use of passphrase?
So you can be creative about it. If you do encounter a service that says that you have to have like a number or, like an uppercase letter or a special character or whatever, just be creative about it. Like use, exclamation points and asterisks and, whatever that is required in order to get it done. Spelling, like if you have a word that has an O in it, you can spell it with a 0. So yeah.
Yeah. Then is there necessary to use is it necessary to use different password from different accounts? And if yes, is there any risk?
Um, so it's really not good to reuse passwords across different accounts. I think that is the most fundamental bit of advice that I can give. You want to avoid that at all costs because people will take advantage of that, and that's the worst. That really is the worst.
Okay. Yeah, Victor would like to know what you consider to be the best and safest mobile app to save confidential documents and audio clips.
Okay, so it depends on your platform. If you are on an iPhone, actually, something that you can do is you can password protect the Notes app. Yeah, and so that stays encrypted. There's also a service for Android called Simple Notes by Open Intent. They do very good work. Yeah, that's pretty much it. Yeah.
Yeah, and trying to add another question to this mix. Sometimes when you are registering, I think somebody asked the question on how safe is Google's authentication, and also Google has a service that remembers passwords. So even if you enter it, it also has that. But when you are moving to a mobile device and you are not using Google Chrome, even if you've selected the save, remember the password, but because it's even though the password is really good, but it's not easy for you to remember. So is there a trick to being able to still access saved passwords on Google platform, on other platforms that may not be Google connected?
So I mean, once again, like I rather than using Google Chrome's, like a password manager, I would recommend using a browser extension by like 1Password or Lastpass or something like that. because it's just easier, way easier to sync across various devices, including your desktop and your mobile, without having to explicitly log in to Google Chrome via the browser. And so, yeah, so that's what I recommend. And that has to do with like compartmentalization, because personally, I don't like, I use Google Chrome, but I don't really like logging in to Google Chrome in the browser. But that said, despite that, I still want to have, you know, like a password manager that can like autofill, that is also available on my mobile phone and on like all the other computers that I use. So yeah, I mean, like, it's not the worst to have that synced to Google, but it's easier, safer, and less cumbersome if you use
Okay.
password manager.
Then one of the last questions I would like to take, I think before we start next week's session, we'll also take some of the questions. Is how serious a problem is losing a YubiKey or Google Dongle?
Yes, yes. Don't lose your USB. So once again, redundancy is key. And so whenever you are setting up two-factor authentication, take a brief moment to take what's called the seed, which is like either that QR code that you're looking at, or it can be like, you know, like I can't scan the code, and then it just shows you like this random string of letters. Save that into your password manager, save that into, you know, like a USB stick or like whatever you need to do in order to, you know, like get yourself back onto that service if you were to lose your YubiKey, if you were to lose your two-factor authentication. And I think that that is the most important thing that people need to do when they are turning on two-factor authentication. Like it's unsafe. It is unsafe and frustrating as hell if you lose access to that second factor. So prioritize that.
So the secret is please don't lose it. And I also want to really appreciate Michael for really really taking some of the questions. Michael really made it much easier for you to and has been able to handle many questions, and I'm tracking it. And it's quite obvious that this is a conversation that is really, really relevant. And I really thank Harlo for really starting this today, and we are going to continue tomorrow. But before I wrap things up today, I would like our participants to share what they feel has been about this session, and maybe we can take insights from it for next week's session. So please, is a simple link, quickly click the link that I just shared, and in one or two words, please, let's see how, so whatever your thoughts about this, and while we wait for your thoughts to come in, I really, really think one of the things that I would like Harlo to also talk about is whether these, for those that already think digital security is cumbersome, do you agree that it's cumbersome, or how can any journalist or anybody be able to fully protect themselves?
Are you asking me?
Oh, yeah.
Well, I mean, I would actually defer to everybody here. I have been over the years trying to to reduce the complexity of the of the security work that I do, simply because, simply because of the feedback that I've gotten from so many folks out in the field. I love doing field work personally, but I'm not the person doing the work. I'm not the person, generating those bylines. That's what you do. And I have to be as cognizant and respective as possible. Given those, given those limitations. So trying to figure out like the best way to, factor in things like redundancy, which is super important, factor in confidentiality, which is incredibly important, looking at trends within the various legal systems that people work within, in order to be as useful as possible. And I think that that's how I've evolved, rather than just being like, use Signal, use Tor. Like, use Signal, use Tor. They're great, but like, don't, take that as a maxim. So, yeah.
Yeah, and if you can look at the screen, we can see the comments from how your participants are reacting to this webinar. The biggest texts represent the ones that more people are mentioning. So which means it has been many of the participants consider it to be quite informative. Knowledgeable is a big useful is also there, and so which simply means that it's really a great and relevant and quite important dialogue that we are having today, and we are also going to continue this dialogue next week. So I will encourage you to join our Facebook forum, because that is where we are going to be sharing materials that Harlo is sharing with us from. And so if you are not a member of that Facebook forum, please go to facebook.com and search for ICFJ Global Health Crisis Reporting Forum. And also, for you to know more information about the forum, please visit icfj.org. And to access more information about journalism, I encourage you to visit www.ignet.org. So Harlo and possibly Michael in the chat box will be joining us next week to expand our knowledge. So on behalf of everybody at the back end, I say thank you very much, and thank you, Harlo. I really appreciate it.